Sometimes one may feel the temptation to use catchy concepts, something which is easy to sell. There's the fast food and there's a bit the fast architecture in the sense that McDonald's may not be very good, which may be efficient in the short term, but in architecture we are looking for something else, for something that goes beyond that.
Hi, I'm Bana, host of today's episode of HubTalks. Joining me in the hub today is Albert Giralt, partner at Renzo Piano Building Workshop. Albert, thank you so much for joining us here in Copenhagen today. It's a pleasure to have you.
A pleasure, likewise.
So you joined Renzo Piano Building Workshop in 2009, and then you progressed to partner by 2021. How was the process of the evolution over the years?
It's a learning experience. No? Every day I remember at the beginning, I had already some experience before, but it's true that the way in which RPBW operates is a bit different from what I had experienced before. That notion of workshop, of craftsmanship, of working the details of each building until the very end of the design process. So it's just a learning experience, and with years you really absorb that way of working, and your experience grows, and then you go from one project to the other. You have more responsibility with time until now.
Wow. The Renzo Piano Building Workshop method was established over 35 years ago. From my understanding, no one really knows where it came from or when it was exactly established, but everyone knows about it. It sounds like this mystical method. Today's conversation is about how the method is manifested in the interior expression of the practice's buildings. But I'd be curious, how would you describe this magical, mysterious?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's magical. No? It's quite grounded, but I think a bit the secret is in the name of the office. Renzo Piano, at the time when he founded the office, together with his partners at the time, they decided that the name of the office would be Renzo Piano Building Workshop, and the notion of workshop is, I would say, key in this, because the workshop, you can understand it as a physical place. It's our two offices. We understand them as a workshop. So we have a workshop in Genoa, we have another workshop in Paris. But the notion of workshop is also about a virtual place where all actors that play a part in building a building, that's where they meet, where they discuss, where they exchange ideas, and where the project takes shape. So we see our offices almost as the place where everyone, the client, which is very important, having a good client is essential, engineers, the contractor later on in the process, consultants, everyone brings their expertise and everyone enriches the project. And the idea of the workshop is this one, of putting together all this knowledge and working together. This is also a method about how you challenge the project, you question the project every day. A project obviously requires good ideas, so there's good ideas there, but then there's an enormous craftsmanship involved in taking that initial idea, which was good, and develop it to the final building. And while you develop it, actually, that brilliant idea just changes and evolves and gets also influenced by other ideas. And I think that the idea of workshop is really working patiently, piece by piece, and crafting the building from the very beginning until the very end, when the construction is finished.
And model making is a big part of the workshop as well.
Model making is a big part of the workshop, but we really like making models, but we like all kinds of tools. And we use all the tools in the same way. In this workshop strategy, if you want, is the models are pretty important. They give you that physical sense of the project. So we make models, we remake the models, and we make the project evolve with this. But we also use, for instance, 3D images in the same way, as a way to question the project, to find the atmosphere of the project. All the tools in this iterative process of trial and error, and that's what makes the project evolve and grow rich.
No, I've heard about this massive collection of models in Genoa, and the process of archiving and shipping models from Paris to Genoa is very intricate. How many models iterations of models would you say each project typically requires?
I couldn't tell.
Wow.
Lots of them. And of different types, because there's models about the massing of the building. that you would typically use at the beginning, and then there's models about certain room or a certain corner of the building. So from the big scale down to the one-to-one scale, there's models all along the process. And aside from the models, there's a moment where you also have prototypes and one-to-one elements that allow you to feel the building in its almost final state.
Are models ever useful in understanding the interior circulation or spatial layout, the interior of a building?
Absolutely, yeah, as well, absolutely. Especially the physical models are very useful because sometimes the virtual images require a lot of, let's say, intellectual effort to understand them. You see the images, that's the building, but that's not real. That's not the real building. The real building, when you visit a building, is very different from the image you may have seen before. The real building has an atmosphere, has a feeling, and the feeling, you get that feeling from really being there. And the physical models, especially interior physical models, are very useful in order to recreate that more general atmosphere, how the light filters in. And then when you have that physical model together with other tools, plans, sections, and also 3D images, then you can, with this intellectual effort, you can get a better grasp of how the building will feel and will look like.
In your experience, does it typically, when a project is completed, do you feel like you already had an understanding of its interior expression from the models?
You get a very good feeling of it, but there's
It's never happened.
as always, there are surprises. So you try to anticipate as much as you can with physical models and with other tools, sections, 2D drawings, and also virtual images. So you try to grasp it, you try to control it and to design it, but at the same time, there's also always a certain degree of surprise, and that makes the magic of architecture as well.
Of course, of course. One thing I'd be interested in talking about is the public realm. The practice is known for opening the ground level specifically into the public realm. It's common across different projects, and it's something that Renzo Piano was typically implementing across museums especially. I'm curious, why do you think this strategy is such a central element?
I think the projects we do, there's one of the important elements of the projects we do is that civic ethos. So the building tries to satisfy the function for which it's being built, but also it goes a bit beyond that. No? It needs to also interrogate the people that walk around it, because the building is always, it forms part of the landscape of our cities. It's that civic idea, the building opening to the city, forming part of the city, which is at the origin of the ground floor of the buildings being open to the public, and the public realm being an essential part of the buildings that we do. And in this way, we have that preference for buildings that are quite light, quite transparent, because it's a way to invite the people in. It's also a way to bring public functions into the building and have this interrelationship between the public and the building. And also, in the end, with this objective, in the end, that the building in a way becomes part of the city where the building is built. One case is the New York Times building, that I think in the end it represents a bit the city of New York as well. And it's something that we are trying also to achieve with the building in Tokyo, the Tokyo Marine new headquarters, where we'll try by offering the ground floor to the public, by changing the public realm, by making it better. We'll try also for that building to be part of the Tokyo its life, so to speak.
I see why that would be very relevant for public buildings or museums, or even the New York Times, for example. But you brought up Tokyo Marine offices, and that's more of a restricted workplace that typically is reserved to the people who work there. I would say it's the same case for the Shard's Place, which is residential luxury. Why would you want to open the ground level in that case when they're restricted?
Well, because the ambition is for the buildings to participate in the life of the city. So an important part of the building may be reserved to the employees, which is pretty normal. And that's something that our client for the Tokyo project grasped very quickly. Tokyo Marine, for instance, is a company that is, let's say, interrelated with Tokyo. I mean, it was a company that was born in Tokyo, and they understand that they also had the duty for their headquarters to offer something to the city. It's their home, but it's also, in a way, the home of the Tokyo. So we put together very quickly a program, a brief, that would combine those private areas that obviously they need for their employees, but also areas of the building which are private, but they are open to the public, where you can have public functions. We are including a concert hall at the basement, and then the ground floor, which has very transparent facades and invites people in, will hold probably concerts, lectures, and other happenings like this, a cafe. And that's a way for also the Tokyoites to appropriate the building.
Yeah. So open semi-access amenities are occasionally open to the public.
Exactly.
Okay.
And for the shared place, there's a combination of two things. No, one thing is that each building we have done London Bridge Quarter. It started with the Shard 20 years ago, then the News Building, and now a shared place, which is about to be delivered. With each building, we bring a public realm improvement, and this is something that people can feel very directly, because the public realm around London Bridge in 20 years has changed radically and dramatically. And each building brings something, and shared place, even if it's high-end residential, it brings additional retail. It opens up the access to Joyner Street, which is an important street that connects both sides of London Bridge Station. It opens views, that building as well, from concourse level, from a square that we are creating between the three buildings, and Southwark to the south. So overall, that building participates very actively in the public life of the London Bridge Quarter.
Yeah, I imagine for the Shard Place, after the Shard being so successful and such a landmark in London, I think everyone's really excited for the Shard Place. And it has this big role to play, especially because everyone's been waiting for this. Would this be the third part of the master plan?
Yeah, so it's the third building to be built. And the good thing as well is that because the Shard contains offices, there's a hotel component, and at the very top there's some apartments, but just 6 apartments, I believe. And the News Building is just offices. So bringing residential there also was important to balance the neighborhood and also to make it lively at all times. Because if you only have offices, it means that you'll only have people from during working hours. And with this, we can balance the neighborhood and have an integrated piece of the city at London Bridge.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. I think a big part of Renzo Piano Building Workshop's approach is diversification of use in residential, which I think is becoming more and more common. What do you think diversification offers in urban context? You mentioned keeping the neighborhood active across 24 hours. How do you think it transforms the urban context?
Well, I mean, that diversity of users is important. Like what we are trying to do in Tokyo is a bit similar, because Marunouchi is the business district, and quite naturally then at perhaps 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, people disappear, no? Yeah. And by bringing new activities, the concert hall that we are including in the building, it's going to be the only concert hall in the whole district. So by bringing these new users, you try to maintain life in that district for the whole day and not only in certain hours. So, and I think in the case of London Bridge Quarter or even the Paddington project, that mixity of users ensures also that the project is successful and that you really operate a deep transformation of the area. Because there's the commercial component, office component, residential component, and with all this, you really change what was there for good.
Okay, wow. When is the Tokyo Marine office supposed to be open? Is it 2028?
It's 2029, I believe.
29.
29, and it's a date that has been set very precisely because Tokyo Marine Nishido celebrates their anniversary, and they wanted to finish the building 1 year before then, so the date has been set, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be respected.
No, I imagine it would be. What's the process like of working on a workplace right now? I know the future of the workplace is something that is thrown around a lot right now, especially in post-pandemic situations. I think in a lot of cities, like a lot of financial hubs in Europe, like maybe London, Dublin, Amsterdam, there was this overall fear that offices would be empty and all of those expensive offices would be kind of gone to waste. So it's always interesting to see that new offices are being developed with such far timelines, like you said 2029. Why do you think the workplace continues to be relevant right now?
I think we have, with COVID, we observed a trend which was for people to stay more at home, We are observing now a bit the opposite trend. So people rediscover the value to see their colleagues more often, to have this everyday connection, which is important to feel part of the team, etc. So there's this opposite trend. At the same time, what we observe as well is that people need to feel that what they find in the workplace is of good quality. It's worth going to the office instead of staying at home. So it's a time where the office space needs to be designed with a lot of care and with the well-being of people, I would say, at heart, because otherwise people prefer to stay at home. But if they find something special, if they find a plus in their workplace, they really want to go there. So normally the commissions you can get is for premium, for very well-designed office spaces, because that means people will go there. And on the other hand, what we can see is that more regular offices now are being transformed to residential or to other uses. Because for these types of buildings, the people do not see any benefit in taking the metro every day, every morning.
So what would you say is a contemporary approach to workplace?
One of the things is well-being. The well-being, which it's a complex idea because it involves lots of different aspects now that you need to bring into the building. One is flexibility of spaces. So the idea to go to your table every day, sit down and then work your hours and go back home, I think is less appealing to the employees at the moment, and they may like to find more specific or function-defined places in their workplace, so that they can decide, depending on what they have in mind to do that day, they can find a variety of spaces with a variety of atmospheres. I think also the office space that we are looking at now is warmer and it feels a bit cozier than it used to. So bringing some of these, let's say, coziness that you may find at home in the workplace is crucial. For instance, in the Tokio Marine building, there was this idea of a forest of wooden columns. No? That was the beginning of the project, the concept of a forest of wooden columns. There were lots of reasons to do that, but one of them is also to bring wood into the interior spaces of the building. That warmth that the wooden columns is bringing, together with the CLT slabs, makes the space very special and, I would say, very comfortable in a way.
I imagine. Wood is a big part of the Tokyo Marine project. I saw that one quote mentioned that it's an unprecedented scale. Wood is being used at a massive scale. Can you walk us through that amount?
Yeah, well, I mean, initially the client, Tokyo Marine, told us that they would like us to use as much wood as possible, which was at the beginning was a bit strange. We accepted the challenge naturally, but it was like, why? No, we wanted to use wood largely, but we wanted to do it also meaningfully. So we started a bit of a research into the Japanese tradition, and you see those Japanese temples made of wood, the columns made of wood. Also, the wooden column in the Japanese culture has a strong meaning of stability, etc. These, combined with those photos of Japanese forests with cedar trees going up to 70 meters, super tall trees, those vertical forests, and then we came with the idea of the forest of wooden columns. And then it seemed impossible at the beginning because we are in a seismic country, Tokyo. But then working with engineers, it seemed that by using what we call a base isolation approach, where a structure of the building is dissociated from the earth. So when the earth moves because of an earthquake, the building just moves slightly, but it tends to stay in place. By doing that, we could really use wood for the structure. And then our first reaction was to use a mixture of steel and wood for the columns in order to be as efficient as possible. But the time that it takes in Japan to certify new construction or structural approaches was so much that the client told us, do not go for the hybrid approach, just use wood. The columns in the end are very big. The biggest that we have is 2.4 by 2.4 meters. The forest of wooden columns go thinner. The columns go thinner as they raise up to the sky. So at the very top, the columns are 1 by 1 meter, and that mobilizes an enormous amount of wood. If built today, it's going to be the building with the largest volume of wood in the world.
The largest. Wow.
Yeah.
That is. But what implications does that have on fire safety and fire resilience?
Yeah, so we have worked intensively with Arup on the one side and also with Mitsubishi Jisho Design, which are the Japanese engineers. We use fire retardant products on wood, and we also have an approach in order to make sure that the building is safe.
Okay. Are you aiming for any kind of green building certification with the project?
We are aiming at LEED Platinum for this building, but that was a request from the client, the LEED Platinum. But we started with this building with the ambition for this building to be very green, very sustainable. So we go well beyond LEED Platinum in the sense that it's a building that we undertook an LCA, a life carbon assessment from the very beginning, and instead of using it as a way to interrogate and see how much carbon we were emitting, we used it almost as a design tool. So at every design decision that you take, you interrogate what's the carbon implication of this decision. So the design of the facades have been largely informed by understanding what's the carbon emissions of each option. Also, the choice of materials inside is also driven by this question of carbon. So using the LCA and using the carbon emissions as a design tool rather than something that limits your creativity.
For sure. I think that makes the most sense as an approach to kind of generally want to overperform rather than look to meet certain check boxes,
Exactly. When you do it this way, also you discover things that are a bit counterintuitive. Now, we discovered, for instance, that we wanted to use CLT slabs because of the benefit of using wood, but we discovered very quickly that if the slab was full in CLT, because of the Japanese regulations in terms of fire, we had to protect the CLT slab so much that the resulting embodied carbon of the slab would be much higher than if we would use a concrete slab. So in the end, we ended up with a solution where we combine a CLT thinner slab, which we use almost as a formwork, and then we lay on top of this a concrete slab, which is much thinner than it would be. And with this, we have two benefits. On the one side, we can expose the CLT because that CLT that we are using participates in the structure, but only marginally. So in case of fire, the slab would still be there. We have lower embodied carbon. So you discover counterintuitive things like using CLT wooden slabs is more carbon intensive in the end, in this case, than using concrete.
And those kinds of learnings are what advance the industry, I would say, especially knowledge sharing with new sort of approaches, no?
Yeah, that's you educate yourself and you educate the whole team and also the industry. In the case of Japan, because a question of carbon emissions is less developed than in Europe, I would say that this building aims to educate the entire market. The generation of EPDs in Japan is much less developed than it is here. This building is a way to, let's say, shake a bit the Japanese market so that the suppliers tend to provide these EPDs, tend to be more aware of the problem, more sensitive about this problem.
Yeah. Did you think any big compromises need to be made when you're aiming for such a low carbon building, I imagine? Do you think net zero or a low carbon building can be less comfortable than a energy expensive and underperforming one?
And one needs to find the perfect balance between, I wouldn't say comfortable, I would say more finding the perfect alignment between low carbon and well-being, especially when perhaps you have two conflicting elements. No? And one example is the Japanese client, Tokio Marine, came to us asking for having a forest at the top of the building. And having a forest at the top of the building is very heavy. So you know that your structure will need to be bumped up because of the presence of this forest. And then your embodied carbon will go up. The question is it worth doing a roof forest at the top of the building? And then is where well-being comes into the equation, and you discuss with the client and you discuss the pros and cons, how much you are increasing your embodied carbon and the benefits that you believe that forest at the top of the building is bringing for the experience of the employees. One thing that needs to be clear is that, I mean, the most, let's say, ecological building is one that will be there for a very long time, that is flexible enough, and also that is, in a way, loved by the users so much as for them to want to keep it there. The worst thing that could happen is a building that only has 20 years of life. So that's the first thing. So doing buildings that respond, that bring benefit to the people who uses is the first thing to do. And then you need to find the perfect balance between things that bring well-being and being as frugal as possible as well.
Yeah. Does the practice work on renovations much?
Yeah.
Okay.
More and more, I think we have an obligation to do that, because sometimes a building is needed, but very often, especially in consolidated cities with consolidated centers, what needs to be done is transforming the fabric that is already there. We are currently working in a department store in Germany, which is being transformed into a mixed use of offices and retail. We have been working on a project in Paris, in Montparnasse Station, where again, a department store, which is almost abandoned now in a crucial spot in Paris, is to be transformed in a mixed use that combines public realm, offices, residential, etc., and which you go from, let's say, an isolated block that is impermeable to having public space at the center, having life at the center, bringing or building a piece of the city where there was just a building almost. So yeah, I think we have an obligation to work on these projects.
For sure. I think a lot of clients, though, when they hire a Renzo Piano Building Workshop, they really want the form and the facade, all of that kind of experimentation. So I think it's interesting to see you more and more involved in renovations.
And I think there's no contradiction anyway, because you may need to design a new facade. But in any case, when we think of the workshop method, it's not about bringing, let's say, a formal gesture into architecture or sort of a catchy image. Is more about the method and the value and the quality that you bring. And this is regardless of the size of the building, whether it's renovation or it's a new building. The method is always the same. And I think you can get to fantastic results and exciting results, be it a renovation or be it a new building.
For sure. Do you often go to completed projects years after completion? What would you say the interior experience is like walking through a building, and are they typically how you had envisioned them earlier in the process?
Yeah, we visit buildings that have been there for a long time, ours and from other architects. It's always quite fascinating to see how the client has appropriated those buildings, because when the buildings are lived, in a way they
get new life.
Yeah, exactly. Get a new life, and they define its soul in a way, because you have anticipated something, but then afterwards, when people is living there, that anticipation always changes a bit. So I think it's very interesting to go sometime afterwards into the buildings. And the other thing that we are trying to do is to monitor a bit how the buildings behave later, because it's when they are used that you can see whether what you design in terms of sustainability strategies, ventilation strategies, etc., whether this works perfectly or needs adjustment. So there's this learning experience, which is very important whenever you have the opportunity to monitor how the building operates afterwards.
But how exactly do you monitor?
Well, you would ask the client, how is it working for them? Because you have developed with the client a certain strategy in terms of ventilation or in terms of heating and cooling strategy. And then you want to know whether what was anticipated in terms of consumption, in terms of system regime, how the system is operated, whether this works as it was intended or not, or it needs a correction. And that may be useful for the building, but also for our future experiences, for the future projects.
Yeah, are you using different processes for post-completion measures?
We need to rely on the client to do that. And what we ask our clients is if they can share their experience and their data collection with us. That includes how the ventilation systems that we have designed work, whether the temperature range that was expected is being respected, etc., etc., etc. And it's not always possible to convince the client to do that, but it's very beneficial for us, for that building in particular, but also for the buildings that we are doing afterwards for future projects.
And are you using any specific technologies there or experimenting with anything new?
Not particularly, no. Not
Okay.
particularly.
Renzo Piano has always been famous for sculpting light, specifically to create a sense of lightness. How would you describe the practice approach to lighting or philosophy?
Yeah, the first thing is probably that when you talk about daylight, it's not so much that you design a space and then you see how the light filters into this space. It's more, as you were saying, using the light to form the space. And that's the approach that was used for the Menil Collection on other museum buildings, where you can really feel those pieces that are molded in relation with the light, and the light getting into the building, and you get these amazing atmospheres that one can see also in the GES2 museum in Moscow. But there's also a lot of care being put in terms of daylight and the treatment of light in commercial buildings as well. It's a bit the same approach. If we take the Sharp Place example, from the beginning, the question of daylight was central, especially as regards the experience when you are inside the building. So when we look at the shape of the building, we see that it may seem arbitrary, but we did all the effort in order to maximize the perimeter of the building so that the interior enjoys as much daylight as possible. That's why we have this intricate shape. So in order for the apartments to enjoy as much daylight as possible. The other example that is interesting in terms of daylight is the Tokio Marine project, because in Japan, the culture for the office space is one where you have enormous floor plates, very deep floor plates, something that it's unimaginable in France, for instance, and probably in Denmark. And we challenge a bit this approach while respecting their desire, which is, okay, we offset our core so that we liberate the west part of the floor plate in order to provide the best views to the Imperial Gardens, which are to the west of our building. And then we set a patio at the very center of this west area so that we divide that very big depth into, and we bring light down at the very center of the building. The second one was to use adaptive lighting that creates an homogeneous lighting throughout the floor plate, that it compensates the difference in luxes that comes from the sunlight. And the other aspect is about the light color, because depending on the time of the day, the color of the sunlight changes. And by being able to adjust also the color of the artificial lighting we are using, we create that continuum between exterior and interior, which makes it much more pleasant for the occupiers that use the space.
The indoor environmental quality.
Yeah. The other thing that we worked a lot on this project, for instance, was what's the experience of the employees in terms of how do they relate with their colleagues? Now, because very often in towers and office towers like this, you work on a floor, and then that's your microcosmos, and you don't know what happens one floor above, one floor down. And especially for a headquarters building where everyone works for the same company, that's a pity. And we came with two strategies to solve that and to encourage people to communicate with each other, to meet, to get to know each other, because Tokio Marine is a big family. One strategy is, again, the patio. The patio, we were saying, it breaks that enormous depth in two and brings light down into the building, but it also allows views from one floor to the other. So when you are in one floor, you can see 4 floors up, 4 floors down, and you know that your colleagues are there. It's that visual contact makes you feel part of the family. Next to the patio, then we have convenience staircases that allows you to go up and down the building without taking the lift, because the experience of taking a lift is completely different from taking a staircase. With the staircase, you have that feeling that you are pretty close to your colleague, whereas if you take the lift, it's already a very different experience. So allowing people to see each other and to travel easily by taking the stairs up and down, I think it's a key element of the design, and I'm hoping that it's going to work pretty well to encourage that sense of belonging, within TMN's employees.
Yeah, and serendipity, I think, just running into people. I never really thought about it this way. For me, I think elevators are also a central meeting spot. Catching up with people in an elevator is is also important, I think. I guess
Yeah,
it
there's the
depends.
elevator pitch. The elevator pitch
The elevator pitch.
but let's say that you're limiting, the
Yeah.
leaves are always there, but
Yeah.
you are limiting a lot the potential for interaction. No? And also it's very framed, the exchanges you can have in a lift. You take the lift. The lift is designed to go as fast as possible from point A to point B. That's the design of the lift, where the design of a convenient staircase is just the opposite. Is take us as long as you want, stop wherever you want. You can change your mind even.
Yeah.
And then you facilitate encounters of another nature, I would say.
True. And you always have your back in the elevator, you're all facing the doors. It's kind of awkward.
Yeah.
I guess it depends also on the staircase configuration. Just, those staircases where you have to open the door to the side and it's just kind of stuffy is not a staircase I want to be on,
Absolutely, I mean, a staircase to perform that objective, it needs to be generous, it needs to be inviting, it needs to be comfortable, and that's the way in which they have been designed. They are light, and they allow people to see through.
Yeah.
They are large, they are generous.
Yeah. Now, circulation spaces are always interesting as meeting spots, I think, overall.
Yeah.
Do you collaborate closely with the interior design firms to work on a project?
We try to do so because we think that completely separating the two walls, when we are not doing the interior design and we do shell and core, dissociating the two walls is a bit of a shame, and is a shame for the building, but also for the end user. Because having this integration between the two, I think it results in a much better building. So we try to collaborate with them as much as we can. One example is the Paddington project, where we have been collaborating with an interior design firm, I think quite successfully. And you find spaces like the Sky Lobby. Sky Lobby in the Paddington project is about, I think, 12 meters off the ground floor in order to liberate the ground floor for retail, etc. And it's interesting because then it's the lobby of the office building, but you're a bit elevated from the street, and that generates a very different relationship with the street. You're still very close. You can see it. It's slightly different, and it's quite interesting. And in this particular space, we collaborated with interior architect extensively. And I think we came up with an integrated design that works pretty well. The Sky Lobby is understood then with that space where, let's say, the public wall meets the private wall, and then you have some activities that are open to everyone. Again, a cafe, some working areas, there's a gym. So that intermediate wall between private and public has been designed in a collaboration. I think it's very successful.
No, definitely. And you can always tell when interior designers and architects didn't collaborate, because there's kind of this dichotomy between in a building. So I think it's key. Before we wrap up, I wanted to explore the next chapter for the practice. What is the vision for the partners when Renzo Piano eventually transitions from his leadership?
We have been working with him for a long time, and we all share this method. We have 4 generations now in the office. There's Renzo, who is a bit of an exception. He's the only representative of his generation in the office. And then we have partners who have been there for a long time, then younger partners and associates, as myself. And then we still have another generation of younger architects. But we all share that passion and the idea that the method we use, the notion of workshop, brings something different to the architectural world. And it would be a pity that this doesn't continue. We feel it's a privilege to be able to bring this to the future and to see how that method, which is not linked to a certain shape, to a preconceived shape or form of the building, how this method is used for future buildings with needs that will evolve, will be different, with technologies that will evolve and will be different, but how this method, how this ethos, the notion of workshop, the trial and error, that craftsmanship approach can generate the architecture of tomorrow, but following the same principles.
Wow. Do you see any strategic shifts or changes within the next decade, or?
Well, I think we are all pretty aware of the climate emergency. So my intimate feeling is that we need to do an extra effort. We are doing efforts, but my feeling is that we really need to do an extra effort in the coming years in order to revert the trend. And that's where I see, but I think it should be our biggest commitment.
Number one priority. And in terms of offices, right now you have 2 offices in Genoa and in Paris. Do you see any expansion over into a third office, maybe?
We are very comfortable with our model. We never wanted to grow a lot because that allows us to be very flexible in the work we accept to do, a bit selective. And when you grow a lot, at some point, you may lose a bit the balance. So I think the idea is to stay with this critical size. We are 130 people. We can do projects of all scales, and we can combine big projects with smaller projects. We put the same energy and the same love and the same attention to all projects, regardless of the money they are bringing in or the size that they have. And I think that the key of this is keeping that controlled size, which allows us this flexibility.
Okay, wow. I do have one last question for you. What legacy or lasting impact do you hope to leave personally on the built environment?
I think perhaps a couple of ideas come to mind. One is, I think the question of the climate emergency is crucial. So I would like to think that a good contributor to this, and I'll try my best for that to be the case. The second one is more about architectural philosophy, if you want, because we see, the actual trend with lots of competition, but they are quite short in time, so you need to run. Sometimes one may feel the temptation to use catchy concepts, something which is easy to sell. But I would like to think that I'll engage myself in continuing doing an architecture which has depth, that it goes beyond a certain shape which could be appealing, or a certain concept that can be catchy, and that I can help RPBW to keep doing an architecture that has a depth, that has a richness. Sometimes I think of it as a bit like there's the fast food and there's a bit the fast architecture, in the sense that it's, I don't know, McDonald's may not be very good, but is easy to eat if you want. And architecture may be a bit the same. So you may have some sort of gestures and things like this, which may be efficient in the short term, but I think in architecture we are looking for something else, for something that goes beyond that, for something that is timeless and brings quality to the people, which at the end of the day is what we are here for.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. Well, I look forward to see your work over the coming years.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much again, Albert, for joining me here today. This has been a fun conversation. And for everyone watching, thank you so much. See you next time.